Hey everybody, it's Joe from greenlightsound.com, and today we're going to take a look at a new plugin released by brainworx through Plugin Alliance, the BX Limiter True Peak. And we're going to talk first a little bit about limiting and true peak limiting and why you would need it, and why this is a great addition to the Plugin Alliance and brainworx line, especially if you're a subscription member and getting this as part of that subscription package. First, we're trying to get rid of inner sample peaks. Inner sample peaks happen when the digital audio, which is basically like in little steps, depending upon your sample rate, how many little steps you have, when that's converted into a smooth waveform into the analog world. And when you do that conversion, sometimes that smooth analog waveform goes a little bit above what that digital sample was in between the samples, and you get this inter-sample peak, which can cause distortion. This gets rid of that. It doesn't allow those inter-sample peaks to happen at all. That's why true peak limiting is great if you want some transparent gain without distortion artifacts. So brainworx claims that this limiter is better sounding than all previously available limiters, with no clipping, with transient preservation, no distortion, and no artifacts. So a really big claim. It can be used on stereo mixes and mastering situations, of course, but can also be used on buses and even individual tracks for better control and balance. And speaking of control, let's talk about these controls right now. We've got a gain knob to start, and that gain increases or decreases the input signal, working in conjunction with the ceiling to get the limiting that you want. The ceiling is the true peak level above which you'll get limiting happening. So you can have 0 dB as your peak, negative 0.01, and so on, bring it down as far as you want. And this link control actually allows the gain and ceiling to work together in conjunction to set the levels that you'd like. The limiter mode up here, we've got two types. Classic mode is kind of safe and less punchy. Modern is a faster, more punchy limiter for modern styles, think pop, EDM, and so on. A standard release control, the release, of course, is the time it takes to return from limiting to no gain reduction at all. This little button down here turns on the XL percentage control. This is a saturation control. If you've seen other brainworx products, they've got that XL saturation in them too. This is the amount of saturation blended with the signal before it hits the limiting stage. Now we'll jump down to the bottom here. We've got the channel link percentage here. 100% all the way to the right. The channels are fully linked, so the channel with the highest signal sets the gain reduction for both channels. So if you get a peak in the left, it brings both channels down. A peak in the right, it brings both channels down. On the other hand, if you bring it down to 0%, they're completely unlinked, and the limiter works independently for both channels. And brainworx recommends you leave it at its default 75% for music situations. We've got a wet-dry limiter mix right here. And one warning about this, if you bring it down below 100%, you can have clipping occurring because you're not getting full limiting going on. So I would recommend leaving it at 100% for most limiting uses. The output dim knob here is the final output of the plugin, and you use this to control the true peak target level while keeping the dynamics and sound set up by the other parameters that you have. So you can kind of bring down that final output while still keeping all those dynamics you've set up in here. We've got a tone control section right above that. All these buttons turn these features on and off right below. High pass filter, low pass filter. In the middle, we've got this foundation control, which is kind of unique. It adjusts the overall tonality of the mix, bass versus treble. So higher values are more kind of bass oriented and more bass heavy foundation. And lower values take away some of that bass foundation, lighten it up a little bit. Think of it as like a really broad tilt EQ that's not moving very much, but can really add some beef to it if you push it up. We'll play with that a little bit later. In terms of our metering section over here, it's included by default. We can turn it off if we want to with this little panel in the top bar. But opening up, we've got true peak and RMS metering left and right. We've got gain reduction left and right, dynamic range left and right, LUFS, LUFS for loudness. The loudness metering can be switched between short term down here, which is 3 seconds, or momentary, which is 400 milliseconds. Different loudness timescales here. We've got a left and right balance meter here, and right below it a correlation for polarity. If you're all the way +1 for this meter, the left and right channels are exactly the same, completely in phase. You have no stereo width. It's mono, basically. As you get towards 0 in the middle here, you're filling the stereo field, but still maintaining mono compatibility. You kind of want to shoot for this, between the 0 and +1 for maximum stereo width, with still having some nice mono compatibility. As you get below 0 toward -1, you're getting some phase issues in your mix. All the way at -1, the left and right signals would be completely out of phase with each other, and would cause lots of phase cancellation. So use this to check out your correlation. You're shooting for somewhere on the right-hand side, moving between 0 and +1. The loudness target down here puts a visual meter up on the LUF scale. So if we want different broadcast standards, it sets up a little meter for what you're trying to shoot for. We can set the metering to its input, pre-limiting, or output, post-limiting. We've got a monitoring section down here where we can listen solo up the left side, the right side, the mid, and the sides by themselves. When you choose these, they all come directly out of the center channel unless you have this solo in place button engaged. If you have solo in place going, then when you hit left, it's only in the left speaker. If you hit right, it's only in the right speaker. Without that, it's in the center no matter which one you pick. You can swap out your left and right channels, flip them around just for some fresh perspective on the mix or to kind of dial in any problems you might have. And that pretty much covers all of the controls. So now we're going to try this limiter out on a mix, on a stereo mix, but I'm going to bring up the Waves loudness meter here in conjunction with it. The reason I'm doing that is because the Waves loudness meter has a true peak meter in it. And this box right here will show us if we go over the ceiling we set, if we get any of those inner sample peaks happening. So this is a limiter, but it can let some things through if it's not a true peak limiter. So let's try to add some gain with this. We'll check the metering out. I'm going to push a lot of gain into it, so be warned, it's going to get loud. But watch out and see if we get any of those inner sample peaks. So I'm getting a lot of gain out of this. We are not getting any inner sample peaks. We're still at negative 0.0. If this went into positive territory, we would be getting those. And it's actually really transparent as I'm pushing that gain through, which is very, very nice. Now what I'm going to do is switch between the two different modes to see if we can hear a difference between the classic, safer, less punchy mode and the modern, faster, more punchy mode. So I'll toggle between these two as I play. Back when on a mix like this, it's pretty subtle, but I do hear a little bit more punchiness with that modern mode. Now I'm going to try the saturation. I'm going to bring down the gain a little bit and play with the XL percentage. Back when in sweet harmony. So one nice thing that saturation can do, it actually kind of shaves off some of your peaks nicely, rounds them off. That's why tape saturation is so great when you're tracking instruments back in the day. It kind of rounds off those transients and allows you to get more gain without having those peaks jump up too much. So you hear a lot of gain difference when I turn the XL off and on. Back when in sweet harmony. So it's great to have that XL feature in there. Now I'm going to try to mess with the foundation control. Again, if I push it up this way, it's more bass heavy, less bass heavy, and negative numbers. Back when in sweet harmony. I remember. So it's nice to have that kind of tone control in there to help shape your limiting and shape your mastering. So now, true peak limiting, we were talking about this before. I'm going to jump back to the old BX limiter. This is the old brainworx limiter that's I used a lot for buses, not so much on masters, simply because I had other true peak limiters that I used instead. This also has that XL function, which is nice for saturation. Some of the same controls, channel link, release, output dim, mix control. Doesn't have quite the same features, but watch as I boost the gain on the BX limiter. Check out this box in the Waves metering, Waves loudness meter. You're going to see it's going to go over. You're going to get some inner sample peaks here. Back when in sweet harmony. There it is. We're over. Already got a little bit of inner sample peaking. We also have a little bit more distortion in this. It's not quite as clean sounding as the true peak limiter. So big update here for sure. The next thing I'm going to take a look at is an old limiter. This is the Waves L2. It's been around forever. People love this limiter. It does have a unique sound to it. But if I really push it, we're going to see if we get any inner sample peaking, and also listen to the tone of it, because it does have a completely different sound for limiting than the other two we listened to.
Back when we were weak, in sweet harmony,
So there's definitely more distortion going on in this one, a little crunchier sound, which the L2 is known for, and some people like that tone, but also a little bit of inner sample peaking going on here. What I would consider to be the main alternative, in my mind, the one limiter that I used before this one, was the FabFilter Pro L2, where you can really boost the gain. You can choose different styles. I'm going to go with transparent right here. I'm going to try to boost the gain. I've got true peak limiting on here, so we shouldn't see any of those peaks happening in our meter over here, but see if we can still get that same sort of transparent sound.
back when we were weak, in sweet harmony, I remember last September.
So we're going for -12 LUFS. The short term was -10. Now if I bypass this and jump back to our true peak limiter, I'm going to push that gain up, try to get the same amount and see if we can get a similar tone.
Back when we were weak, in sweet harmony, I remember last September.
I mean, I really like the transparent nature of this plugin. It sounds very, very clean. I feel like I can push a lot of gain out of the song without getting too much distortion, not many artifacts. It's probably louder than I even want it to be before I hit the point where I'm starting to be like, that's too much. So I really like how clean this limiter is for sure. This is a great addition. If you're a subscription member to Plugin Alliance, this is kind of one of the holes they had in their subscription package. You had a lot of great digital tools, a lot of old emulations of old gear, and you had a limiter, but you didn't have a great true peak limiter like you do now. So this is a great addition to the lineup. Highly recommend this. The BX limiter, True Peak, fantastic sounding limiter. You can get a lot of gain out of your material without getting a lot of artifacts and no inner sample peaks, which is fantastic. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, so we can keep you in the loop as to what's coming up next, and I will see you in the next one.